morning. Happy New Year. It is 2020, and this is the first episode of the VUU Church of the Larger Fellowship, our Church Without Walls. I'm Aisha Hauser, and I am in Seattle, Washington at the crack of dawn. And we have an amazing show today with an amazing guest. And before we introduce her, I will have the rest of the panel let us know where they are and what the weather is like where they are. Where we are expecting Seattle's Armageddon for Snowmageddon, or Armageddon, which I can't help but curse about the prospect of World War III, but I'm going to pass this on to Meg. How are you?
You know, I'm in Minneapolis, where it's been unseasonably warm, which I think is overall not a great thing, but I have to admit, it's really nice to not have to know where my mittens are every single minute of my life. Anyway, and yeah, I'm with you on it just feels like a time of escalation with the fires raging in Australia and Puerto Rico and the war in the Middle East. It's a rough time. So I'll say what I keep saying, which is so mundane, but get plenty of rest, drink plenty of water, because really, and fight back. Christina, how are you?
I'm doing well. Hi, everyone. Christina Rivera, and I'm coming to you from Charlottesville, Virginia, where we have snow on the ground, which is our first snow of the season. So, of course, everything shut down. It was great, but it was interesting to see people out and about, and then it was just bare. Like there was nobody out anywhere at all. But luckily, the snow happened day before yesterday. Yesterday in Richmond, a group of us went to talk to the General Assembly and protest in front of the General Assembly about getting local control back to take down the monuments, the Civil War monuments that are in Virginia localities. Right now, there is a statute that says the only group that can take those down is the state. So there is a bill being introduced into the assembly this year, this session, and our session is only 8 weeks, and we've got to get it done. That would give local municipalities the control to say whether or not these statutes should stay or go. So we're hoping for, as we call it, monumental justice. We'll see what happens. I'll keep you all posted. Michael Tino, how you doing?
All right. Good morning, everyone. Michael Tino joining you from Peekskill, New York, for my office/guest bedroom. So the teddy bears and the grandparents are joining us as well. I am very glad that it is beautiful outside, because the world is on fire, sometimes literally, and it's at least not gloomy and gray. While to fortify me to face what's going on. So we had a snow squall yesterday here, and it was a whiteout for about 35 seconds, and then it was clear, bright blue, sunny skies. So it dropped enough snow in about 35 seconds just to frost everything, with like one snowflake deep layer of sparkle. And it was fine, because it just gave us all a little bit of strength to like open up the newspaper and engage with the world. Here I serve a congregation in New York, and we, like many congregations, talk about the joys and sorrows that people bring in their lives on Sunday. And we light small tea light candles, and I had 3 big pillar candles there this Sunday, and I said, usually we invite you to bring the personal joys and sorrows that are happening in your life, but if you're an engaged citizen of the world, you come into this room with sorrow heavy on your heart, and I'm going to light these candles for those. And I just did, because we have to, because that's what we do as people of faith. Lori Stone Sirtosky, you are doing tech out there in Arizona, are you not?
That's right. Thank you, Michael. My name is Lori. I am in Phoenix, Arizona right now, which has a rare gray day. But I just got to feed a hummingbird from my balcony, so that was cool. I will be over on Twitter if you want to tweet to hashtag the VUU, THEVUU, or join us on the CLFUU channel over there. You can mention us. And if you have questions, you can also join us on YouTube to chat, and we will be I will pass those questions and comments into the panelists as they discuss today interfaith families with Susan Katz Miller. Susan?
Lori, pause 1 second before
Oh.
Susan comes in. Do you want to mention the fact that we're actually moving to YouTube after
Oh, sure. Yeah.
viewers have seen many weeks of struggle with Facebook?
That's right. So this is going to be our new I never say permanent, always in beta here at the CLF. So this is going to be our committed place that we go live now on YouTube. Facebook has been giving us some challenges for a long time, and regular viewers, you know this. So always join us on YouTube now from here going forward. We got a little bit.ly URL, so bit.ly/CLF-VUU will always take you to what is going on live Thursdays at 11. And we'll still have our Facebook events, so you can get to it there too.
Oh, fabulous. So it'll still be on Facebook with the link to YouTube so people can find it.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, Lori. And Antonia is at Meadville Lombard
That's right.
For the month. So we will see them when they return in February. I am so excited. I've been a fan of our guest, Susan Katz Miller. I'm just going to hold up your book right now, The Interfaith Family Journal. Author and journalist Susan Katz Miller is an interfaith families consultant and speaker. In 2013, Beacon Press published her book, Being Both, Embracing Two Religions in One Interfaith Family. And Skinner House published her new book, The Interfaith Family Journal, in 2019. This is the one that I held up. She has spoken at 2 Unitarian Universalist General Assemblies and gave the Sophia Faz keynote in Portland, invited by LREDA, the Liberal Religious Educators Association, and been a guest preacher in many UU communities. Susan, welcome. I have been, like I said, a fan of yours because the whole interfaith family experience is one that is mine for 3 decades. So I grew up Muslim, my husband grew up Jewish, and we've raised 2 children that are kind of in their own path. And so one of the first things I want to start with is just to ask you, say a little bit about what your story is and how you came to write these books and what inspired you.
I'm so excited to be here. I have been a lifelong Unitarian Universalist fangirl and ally. I grew up in a little New England town outside Boston where the Unitarian Church looked out over the town green. And my father was one of the only Jews in town. It was, sort of a Protestant town with a Catholic minority. And so he was invited by the Unitarian Church, it called itself Unitarian Church, to come and do the model Passover Seder every year. So he was already involved with UU education when I was a child. And in fact, my family ended up using the Passover 15-minute Seder that he developed for that Unitarian Church because it was so succinct and great when you had 4 little kids. I'm one of 4 kids. So my parents were an interfaith couple. My father was Jewish, my mother was Protestant. And they did what most clergy, most religious institutions urge you to do, which is to pick one of your 2 religions. And they chose Judaism. So my siblings and I were raised as Reformed Jews. In adulthood, my husband, who also happens to be Episcopalian as my mother was, my husband and I chose a new pathway that has just been kind of building since the 1980s, which is to do both of your family religions and refuse to choose. And over the years, a lot of people have said to me, well, why aren't you just a UU? Because everything you do, theologically, ethically, even culturally could fit inside a lot of UU communities. And there are, of course, a lot of interfaith families that have found their home in that UU world. And I may yet end up doing that. I don't know. But we chose to join a community where we were teaching the children specifically Judaism and specifically Christianity, starting in pre-K with Hebrew literacy. So it goes very deep into those two specific religions. And we have both a rabbi and a minister on staff. And so my first book with Beacon Press, being both, here it is, was about this new sort of grassroots movement to refuse to choose one religion and to do both, whatever those are. And there's a chapter called Interfaith Next Generation or something like that, which has Muslim and Christian, Hindu and Christian, other combinations that were just beginning to arise. For my second book, which Skinner House actually came and asked me to write this. They wanted an interfaith families journal, and they wanted it for Unitarian Universalists who are looking for ways to feel more connected to those religious heritages, even within their UU identity and affiliation. But also they were looking for a book that would appeal outside the UU world and be a bridge between maybe the UU world and a lot of people who have become alienated from traditional religious institutions, but haven't figured out how to do what they want to do now in 2020. Do they want to affiliate? What would that look like? What are they going to practice at home? How are they going to honor the 1, 2, 3 or more religions in their heritage? Because more and more, we're not a binary of like Jewish and Muslim or Christian and Hindu. We are somebody who comes from a Christian Jewish background marrying somebody who comes from, a Hindu and pagan background. So you've got 3 or 4 heritages, traditions that you're trying to figure out how to integrate them, how to practice, how to be the most successful interfaith family you can be, whatever that looks like. So this new book, the intention was not to push people to choose both or to push people to become UUs. The intention was to kind of think deeply about what it is you want to do. Where have you come from? Where do you want to go? Do you and your partner or partners or family members understand where each other are coming from? And how do you move together into your future, whatever that looks like, whether that's choosing no religion or 1 or 2 or a new religion or 2 religions or more. So
one of the things we teach, thank you. One of the things we teach when we do our whole life sexuality education program is if you don't teach your children about sex, someone else will. And that's very true about religion. And so what I appreciated about the book, I was one of the people asked to write a blurb, is it is super intentional about asking questions. So because I do want to ask you some questions from the book, but before that, I'm curious what your children, what have they reflected as they've grown to you about, because it is unusual. I mean, every time I've met an interfaith couple in New Jersey, this is when my children were still small, they would say their clergy person, whether it was a rabbi or a priest or minister, would say, pick one. They can't do both. And it was like, I think what I realized is when people are growing up with children being bilingual and the worry that they can't know both, and children are incredibly brilliant little creatures, and not creatures, people. And they can learn 2, 3 languages, and they can learn 2 religions or 3 religions. So I'm curious what your feedback from your children has been.
So my children are now adults. They're in their 20s, and I try to be careful not to speak for them at this point. And but I have permission to say that they both still feel connected to both Judaism and Christianity. They also have both spent time investigating and exploring other religions. One of the patterns I see, people often ask me when you raise kids with 2 or more religions, how do they turn out? What do they choose? And you can't really answer that question. One reason is that none of us makes a definitive choice at any age. If I talk to you at 13, when you're 20, when you're 40, when you're 60, those answers are going to look different. So you can't measure an endpoint of how they turn out. We're all on these journeys. We all respond to our geographic area. What are the communities available to you? Do you have a UU community? If you don't, what would you choose? We all respond to our extended families and how they're moving and intertwining. When our children become old enough to start thinking deeply about these questions, we often respond to our own children. Our children may be exploring and discovering religious, spiritual, secular, cultural worlds that then we get involved with as well. But one thing I did conclude, I interviewed and surveyed both parents who were choosing more than one religion for their kids and young adults and teens who had gone through formal programs to learn both Judaism and Christianity. And the one of the few conclusions I could really draw from these young people was that they are very religiously and spiritually curious. A lot of them went into college and studied not only Judaism and Christianity, but other religions. A lot of them had just it's almost like they had formed a template as small children learning more than one cultural system to think about comparing and contrasting and questioning, and all of that made them likely to take courses in Buddhism and Hinduism and other things. So it's interesting.
I have a question. You mentioned this congregation in the DC area, which I'm familiar with, which is Interfaith. Is that part of a movement? Are there other places like that around the country? Because I only know of that one in DC, but I'm wondering, are there other places like that? Are they in some kind of alliance with each other? Is that congregationally a movement?
So I wouldn't necessarily, I do call it a movement. It's a grassroots movement. It's not a formal institutional movement. The book traces the sort of history, sociology of the interconnections. There are vibrant communities doing this in Chicago, in New York, more than one in the New York area. There's a smaller one in Philadelphia. There's the one in DC. And they grew up independently. It's almost like a whole generation of people simultaneously said, wait a minute, why are the benefits of choosing one outweighing the benefits of doing both? And they were just looking at it more critically and more from their own points of view about, and so they formed these communities, and there's a loose network. So I have a Facebook group called the Network of Interfaith Family Groups, which is a private group for families that are raising kids with more than one religion, whether they're in a community or not. And part of the point of that Facebook group is to support, say, a Buddhist and Catholic family in Kansas that doesn't have other families like them around them, but they have this Facebook group that can support them in, are we going to confuse our kids? Or, how do we deal with our grandmother who's not happy with what we're doing, or whatever their questions are.
Can you real quick clarify the they community you're talking about? Is it the Reformed synagogue you go to, or is that, what was the they that Meg was talking about? I got a little bit confused.
Okay, so we were talking about these new grassroots communities for families that are doing two religions, and the one in the DC area is called the Interfaith Family Project. Project is very intentional. It's like you say on The View, we're always in beta. So the Interfaith Families Project is always a project. It's not trying to become a new religion. It's a support community for families that are doing both. And depending, like the one in Chicago is very tied in with Catholic and Jewish families, because that's who married each other in Chicago historically. And they have a lot of support from the Catholic Church there. So a lot of those families would go to Catholic church and maybe also belong to a synagogue, but they put their children in this interfaith education program for their religious education. So they're actually triple belonging in some ways, even with only 2 religions.
So when you said we hired a minister and a rabbi, that's the project. Gotcha.
That's
Thank you.
the Interfaith Families Project. Yeah, which I don't have a leadership role in it at this point. I was looking at it as a journalist. My background is in journalism. I was a Newsweek reporter for 3 years. I was a freelance and a stringer from Africa. We lived in Senegal for 3 years, and then from Brazil, where we lived for 3 years. And so I used my journalism skills to kind of look at this movement as it was growing in Chicago, in New York, in Washington. At the same time, my kids were in the Washington Interfaith Education Program through Interfaith Families Project. But again, I want to say that this new book is really for everybody. It's, a lot of people still can't get their head around teaching children more than one religion, or they feel, okay, but it's better if you choose one. It's okay. Whatever you think about that idea, this book is going to be helpful to you. In fact, a lot of people have told me that they are both of the same religious identity, like say they're both Presbyterians. This book is still really helpful because even if you're both Presbyterians, you don't have identical sets of beliefs. You don't have identical practices from your childhood. You're still going to possibly find yourselves in conflict over, do we, I don't know, have a live Christmas tree or an artificial Christmas tree? Those are things from your background, from your culture that you're bringing forward and that you have to work together with your partners in your family to figure out. So
I think this is really exciting. And, as someone who serves a congregation in the New York area where lots of the folks that I serve come from interfaith families that they've created and who have found Unitarian Universalism, this is a great way to help them authentically teach their children about their own heritage. And I think that's great. And I will use it. But my question actually comes from experience with friends. So my folks in my congregation have found Unitarian Universalism, and they're choosing both in the Unitarian Universalist way, which is a particular kind of way to choose both. But I have a lot of friends, almost all of whom are, one partner is from a Christian background and the other from a Jewish background. At least that's who my friends are. And a lot of them got that advice, pick one, right? Which I'm glad we're exploding in a certain way. Like, I'm glad we're we're moving beyond that advice. And all of them that I can think of, like your parents, have chosen to raise their children Jewish. And the ones who have really sat down and struggled with it have often come to that from a place of sort of recognizing the way like systemic power and religion in the United States intersect, and to choose to basically say to them, well, Christianity is so pervasive in our society that they'll pick up Christianity just from our society, but we need to actually make an effort to give our children pride in their Jewish heritage. And I wonder what you say to families who struggle with that particular dynamic.
So my parents made that same decision for a lot of those same reasons. And there is obviously the pull of, being the underdog religion and the fear that it's going to disappear, be assimilated out of existence is a very real fear. And I never would tell somebody they're not making the right choice. I don't think my parents made a bad choice. I think they made an excellent choice. And there were benefits to having that one religion that I grew up with. There were also drawbacks. There are benefits and drawbacks to any of the choices that you can make. you're always going to be on some level an interfaith family. Even if that language doesn't speak to you, you're always going to have extended family with more than one religion. You're always going to have this heritage from more than one religion. So, you know, some people don't like the term interfaith. That's fine. The language is complicated. But so for some people, that is the right choice. And I'm never going to tell people that it's not. And it, as I said before, it also does really relate to a lot of practical, you know, is there a Jewish community near you that is really going to be fully inclusive and welcoming? You know, do you like the rabbi? Everybody goes through that process when they're choosing a religious community, even if they already know what their identity and their affiliation is going to be. So, so all of that gets kind of factored in, and there's a process in the journal, which there's a whole chapter on finding community, figuring this out. And I actually have people put up a bulletin board with little push pins. And there are questions that you go and you ask when you visit each community to see, is this the right fit for us? And you may end up choosing one, or you may end up choosing more than one that you want to be affiliated with. So in terms of, for instance, me as an interfaith kid myself, or my children, I will always stand up and say, I'm Jewish when I am confronting anti-Semitism, you know, and I expect my children to do the same, and they do the same. I've seen them do it. It's complicated because then you also trigger a whole discussion in that community about who gets to make that claim. How do you prove it? Different communities have different sets of criteria for that. So there is a level where I have been sort of like, okay, I am making this claim and I don't really care who thinks what about it. It comes from my family, my training, my background, and my choices, and I'm making that choice. So, and you see the same kinds of fraught conversations occurring now in more recent immigrant communities. You know, you have Hindus worrying about their kids being assimilated into the Christian majority. You have Muslims worrying about their kids being assimilated into this Christian majority. At the same time, we see Christianity having fewer and fewer affiliated followers, and we're reaching a tipping point where we have more unaffiliated than affiliated. So the way this feels, I think, is going to change going forward as we are a country of lots of different religious identities and spiritual communities, and not necessarily a Christian country anymore.
So Kiana Perkins is online and she writes, my faith walk is a mix of Black Unitarian Universalism, African earth-based practices. My kids also experience Catholic, Jewish, and pagan faiths. And she also says she loves this topic. And it actually, I'm reading this comment because it brings me to my question of what have you found in this at the intersection of religion with race and ethnicity? Because so often our cultural upbringing, if you're a person of color, does have a lot to do with your religious upbringing as well. And so the idea of choosing one is something that multiracial families also often are faced with in terms of how do the children identify, you know, how do they self-identify before they're able to self-identify? How do you identify for them? And so I wonder if that that initial advice that we used to be given about pick one, where that comes from, like what was the thought of religious leaders in that, and how does that intersect with the race and ethnicity?
Yeah.
Question?
Those are really important whole worlds to unpack. Academics, when they look at somebody like me who is claiming my interfaith identity, they put it in the context of what they call multiple religious practice or multiple religious belonging. And multiple religious practice is the norm in a lot of the world, in a lot of Asia, in a lot of Africa, in a lot of Latin America. A lot of it is a colonial world where you had indigenous religions and then layered on top of them colonial religions, and people who have persisted in honoring both, whether or not they were supposed to. And so, yeah, the idea that you must pick one is in some senses a very European or American kind of white concept. And what are they thinking when they say that? You know, a lot of clergy are thinking, pick one and hopefully you'll pick mine. I mean, they need to fill the pews. It is a market share situation ultimately. But I am now in conversation with a lot of African Americans who are reclaiming African religion while simultaneously practicing Christianity or Islam. And of course, indigenous peoples throughout the Americas and throughout the world have always been honoring those ancestral religions while also possibly being nourished, fed by these colonial religions, for better or for worse. So if you look beyond kind of, you know, your New York area, your DC area, what your clergy are telling you, and look at the whole wide world, this idea of honoring both actually has been going on forever and is not a new or, you know, dramatically shocking idea.
I want to read Kiana, who's one of our super fans, I need to say, Kiana Perkins. She says, cultural practices and religion affiliation are huge in the Black community. There was a time when your community was your church, and folks asking, what is church home, before they ask your name. I want to ask you, Susan Katz Miller, from your book, because I think this is the strength of the book, is the intentionality of what you're asking. So this is one of the questions with a blank page. So the question, it gives you space to write your answer. Imagine that your family chooses your life partner's religion, and then in parentheses, or secular worldview together. What do you think this decision will mean in terms of the holidays you will celebrate, your daily lives, your affiliation with religious institutions, and your children's education? So either answer that or maybe talk about what you imagine this conversation going, or did you ask your husband this? I mean, you and your life partner, did you both ask each other this question?
We did, and it's important. I think part of what this question is getting at is we tend to go in very defensively thinking about what it is we want to retain from our own background and what it is that we don't want to lose from our own background. And you really must put yourself in the other person's shoes, and not necessarily let you know, the fate of your religion in the world kind of bowl over your partner and their feelings. It often does work this way, that the minority religion feels like it's more important because you think your kids are going to pick up Christianity from osmosis, from the culture, which, by the way, I don't think is necessarily true. What you pick up in the culture through osmosis is Christmas carols and, you know, tree decorations in the mall. But you do not pick up, like, what is the difference between Unitarian and Trinitarian? And have I thought through what I feel about that? And what are my choices for affiliation within Christianity based on that theology? I mean, it's real stuff. It's not just, you know, the tinsel. So sometimes I think it's hard for Christians to kind of stand their ground and say, wait a minute, I have a culture. It's not just the plain vanilla American background. my culture is whatever, Polish Catholic or African Methodist Episcopal. And that comes with all that heritage, all that history. And you may feel strongly about passing that on to your child, or at least having your child feel affection and have a level of literacy that they can converse with the grandparents and the extended family about it. Regardless of what decision you make about affiliation and identity. That's part of what I write about, is no matter which choice you make, your child can benefit from education. There are ways that you can help grandparents, extended family feel like beloved teachers and ambassadors for their heritage, for their traditions, even if you didn't choose their religion for the kids officially. So I think I went off on a tangent here.
I love tangents.
I will say in that conversation with my husband, which occurred in 1990 something, he said, I'm willing to have a Jewish family. He said, it is a minority religion. I don't want it to die out. I see all that's compelling about it. We could raise Jewish kids. And I'm actually the one that said, yeah, nah, I think I have something that will work better for me, for us, because I saw the sacrifices that my mother made. Honestly, as a young feminist, I was troubled that she, as the woman, gave up her name, gave up her career, and gave up her religion, and that those things were tied together. And I kind of wanted to stand up for her a little bit in that moment. And she was very moved to discover that there was this option now, which there wasn't in the 60s when my parents had to make this choice of doing both in a more intentional way. So.
I mean, it sounds like you did raise Jewish children and you also raised Christian children. And I think that's really great.
We like to say we're 100% both. Yeah.
No.
We don't like to be fractionated. We don't like to be dissected. We like to feel whole.
That's what I'm getting from the way you talk about your family and your children. I wonder, Aisha, that question is interesting. And I wonder if maybe we all want to think about what our answers are, because the way I heard it was, if my family had to choose what my husband's religion was going to be before they knew who he was, right? And like, I grew up in Brooklyn, and like all my parents' best friends are Jewish, so like they would have been really excited for me to have a Jewish husband, because it also would have meant that there would have been no competition for Christmas and Easter, and
Right.
B, they would have had a family to celebrate Jewish holidays with, right? It's like, oh, good, more holidays would have been really good for my New York Italian
it's interesting because
Catholic family.
That's so fun. Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey, and so did my husband. When we were dating, I did go to a synagogue with him, and I was born in Egypt, so I have very much Middle Eastern. So in addition to being Muslim, it's when I walked into the synagogue, while I loved the service, seeing the Israeli flag with the US flag, this is not me being such a nuanced conversation. Support Israel. Israel has a right to exist. And what I was afraid would happen with my children was they would hear anti-Arab sentiments. I didn't choose to raise them Muslim because I didn't want them to hear anti-Semitic sentiments tied with people's feelings about Israel. So for me, I actually love the Jewish faith. Love it, love it, love it. And thankfully, grew up with celebrating Seder, and my neighbors here in Seattle invite us to Sukkot. And there's beautiful things that I love about the theology and about the faith. And this was me being in my early 20s. So I was young. Now I think I would have had a much more nuanced approach and less of that fear. But I definitely had that fear politically, and politically in terms of what my children, and we didn't even have kids yet. It was just more like, I knew what I felt. So I projected onto my as yet unborn children what may happen. Because here's what I'll say, my experience, even the most socially liberal Jewish person I've met, when it comes to talking about what's going on in the Middle East, the conversation goes off the rails. It's almost inevitable. And I haven't found a good way, and we do not need to go on this tangent at all. I just want to name that was part of the complexity of my family's decision making. And we ended up Unitarian Universalist, and my children actually like going to Protestant churches. And my daughter thought WASP stood for White Anglo-Saxon Presbyterian. I'm like, well, 3 out of 4, close. I want to name from Janine Gelsinger, who's also one of our super fans. She writes, in my experience, my kiddo did pick up a lot of Christianity from school and other kids, as reflected in a lot of her questions about heaven, Jesus, sin, evil. I think that's true. And I think the other thing that children pick up is toxic Christianity. So I think there's value in teaching, almost as a history of Western civilization, of a lot of the imperialism and colonial thought came from the idea of the doctrine of discovery in Christianity. So there's value even what children are picking up, even UU children as religious educators. It's important that folks understand what real, or the Christianity that's in the Bible, that fights for the poor, that is much more compassionate in some ways. It's not all compassionate, but anyway, so there's nuances to the conversation in terms of politics and kind of what's in the air of what people claim. And you know what? You could do the best you can, and children grow up to do what they want because they have their own minds. That's an interesting, my children are also young adults. So I'm like, oh, you're doing your own thing. Look at that. Someone once said to my daughter when she was talking about her family, have you considered Unitarian Universalism? Okay, so, go ahead.
But yeah, I want to acknowledge that a lot of it also is very strongly dependent on the region. You know, if your children are growing up in Alabama, you know, yes, they're going to have people on the playground telling them that they're going to hell or they need to be saved or whatever it is. Sorry, Alabama. My kids growing up in the DC region did not, they on the one hand did not have that kind of toxic encounter. On the other hand, they probably learned less about Christianity in, you know, their social life in the public schools than they would have if they had been living somewhere else.
So
well,
I also
having grown up Unitarian Universalist in West Virginia, I will just say that what I learned about Christianity was those are the people who beat you up. So I think it was handy when I came out later. I was like, oh, I know you already. But, and it was handy because literally as a lesbian, I got to go home and have parents who said they don't know what they're talking about, which a lot of white gay people don't have that experience. But I do think that toxic Christianity, or what I came to call Christofascism that I grew up with, it is such a loud voice in the culture that I agree with Aisha that to introduce all the beautiful parts of Christianity, liberation, Christianity, all of that, unless you're in really particular places, it's hard to get that culturally. So yeah, but I'm really curious, because Jewish Christian is one thing, but when you're looking at, Hindu Christian or things that are, at least Judaism and Christianity are both monotheism, but, when you're really getting into really big differences in understanding the nature of reality, where do you see families getting into the biggest fights? That's what I'm curious about. Is it about things like Christmas trees, or is it about, I mean, I know families who have really fought about circumcision. I'm just thinking of the families that I know and the really deep family issues that have come up from religious differences.
Yes, but you see, I know Jewish families who've had those fights about circumcision. So again, I don't think it's necessarily, these fights are not going to necessarily come out of having two different, formal religious identities, as they are differences in what your family has given you and what your values are and what your beliefs are, what your cultures are, and how you envision the future. So I resist kind of the problematization of interfaith families. Like, when I'm on a local television program, they're always like, why is it hard? What are the problems? What are the fights? And I'm always insisting if we talk about that, I want to also talk about what some of the actual benefits are. Because a lot of my journey has been claiming what is beautiful about being part of a complex family, a family that has this roots that are broad and deep and complex and multiple. And so what I'll say about the fights and the problems is that, again, the journal is designed to help you with all that stuff. You know, it's designed to help you set it out on paper, kind of quietly. There are writing prompts, and then each section has discussion with your partner, questions, answers, to see if you're hearing each other, to see if you're understanding what your partner's trying to say, to try to figure out what it is that your partner's not getting about how you feel and why you feel it. And then there's actually a creative project in each chapter, because some people, it helps them to work through this stuff if their hands are busy, if they're pulling on the audio, the visual. And so there are projects you can do together and that you can involve kids in. For instance, in one chapter, I have you do a kind of a family tree, but it's about the religion and spirituality and the journeys that your ancestors have taken. And what I found is a lot of people know the religious identities of their parents. You know, one was Catholic, one was Methodist, but they actually don't even know a generation back. And they might not know that their father, who was a Methodist, actually was born as a Mennonite and then became an atheist for a while and then ended up as a Methodist, and why. And in investigating these stories about our own families, I think it helps people to see that we are all on these journeys and that the end point is never fixed, and you don't have to panic that you have to stick with whatever it was or is for the rest of your life. No.
So good reframe. I have a couple questions from readers who are wondering questions. So AJ Van Tyne wonders, does this work for an older family with teens and adults on journeys to navigate together? And Janine Geisinger asks, and this is a big one, Janine's question, I know a lot, or Gelsinger, I'm sorry, so many UUs, this is the case. What about when one parent is hardcore atheist, humanist, science, logic, or even anti-religion? Can the exercises in the journal help navigate those conversations too?
Yes. First of all, I would point out, if you're a Unitarian Universalist, you are already doing this, right? You're already drawing on multiple sources of inspiration. That's part of your backbone. And I think that Skinner House was...
We hope.
Well, it's the intention, right? I think Skinner House was interested in this book in part because they just wanted to help people in a micro level, a family level. You know, your particular UU community might or might not have resources in your particular religious heritage. And so a lot of this, you have to do it yourself. Your family has to do it. And you can't really rely on a community to do it. We all need communities. That's a whole other discussion. But only you can go to your grandmother, if she's still alive, and find out, you know, what went on. What was she always Catholic? You know, to what degree was she honoring ancestors in Indigenous practice? And what did that look like? And what did it look like when she began also practicing Catholicism? You need to get those stories, and those stories will feed you in moving forward with whatever it is you want to do. I forgot the other parts of the question.
Is this work for older family with teenage children and adults?
Yeah. And I think that, again, that's why I think Skinner House wanted this book. They told me this is not just for young couples. This is for families with children, older children, because the thing about older children is they start developing their own ideas. And you don't want to get into a situation with your own children where you're fighting them on their journey, whatever their journey is. And you want to give them as much resources as you can and help them feel that affection with the bonds that you have, no matter where they end up going. So, you know, they may be declaring themselves to have a new religious affiliation by the time they're 12. You might have to face that. All of us might have to face that. We could both be Methodists and our
Right.
kids will decide to become Baha'i or pagan. And we have to figure out how to do that. And in that instance, you become an interfaith family. So, I mean, for me, there's a level where all families are interfaith families because we all have different beliefs and practices, et cetera, no matter whether we have the same identity affiliation or not. So, but if you're a Methodist family and you suddenly have a pagan daughter, you are definitely an interfaith family. So all of the tools in this book will be helpful. They don't have to be between, you know, two partners who are married. It could be between you and your teenage child, thinking about what is it that's attracting them, why, how are you going to negotiate that together? And so I haven't actually gotten a lot of feedback yet from people with older children who've worked through the book. It's new enough that I don't have that much data yet from people who've been using the book, but I'm hoping that I will get that. I did beta test it with a lot of people, including my friend Tahil, who's a Hindu Sikh interfaith child, read it for me. So two, you know, not to Abrahamic religions. Do we have a better term for that yet? Abrahamic is so patriarchal, but I don't know what to call Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
But they are patriarchal. I think it's hard. I think it actually is very apt because that's what they are. I mean, I don't know. We could come up with something. I also just wanted to lift up real quick that I really appreciate you also through the book get to a place where you empower the couple, the folks, to speak to their immediate family, to say, hey, here's a script, here's ways you can have this conversation with folks who haven't engaged in this book. So I want to lift that up and appreciate that. Michael,
Yeah.
I think you had a question.
Well, I was just wondering, you know, because and this might get a little bit at what AJ was asking about in terms of like, you know, could a young adult, for example, use this book to get to know their parents better, so that maybe one day down the road, when they might or might not like want to have a partner or children, like they have those answers and this sort of record of what their family history is. I haven't read the book, and so I don't know. Would that be like an interesting and appropriate use for the questions that you pose?
I have read it. I'll say yes, but go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I will say yes. One of my closest friends is a multiple religious practitioner. He's a Jewish Buddhist, and he hadn't really thought of himself as being part of an interfaith family. His family practices Judaism, but he started filling it out by himself. His wife wasn't interested, and he was just filling it out as an individual who has these connections to Judaism and to Buddhism. And he said it was actually really helpful for him. It asked questions in a different kind of way than he had ever encountered before, because it's not like a religion book, and it's not really a psychology book. It's something in between. And I don't think anybody's ever created a tool like this that would work for kind of every family and that is so open-ended. I mean, I'll tell you, when Skinner House came to me and said, we want a book on interfaith family, an interfaith family journal, I said, oh, good, because I've been thinking about writing one of those. The idea had occurred to me because a lot of couples come to me and they ask me to coach them. And I do a little bit of that, but I can't coach everybody. So I thought if there was a book they could do to go through this process. But I was thinking, to be honest, Jewish and Christian, because I was raised in that binary. And that is still the most common form of interfaith family in America. But this is why I love VUUs. You know, my editor was like, no, we want it to work for all religions. Can you do that? And I really had to think about, oh, wow. So there's nothing in the book about Hanukkah. There's nothing about Christmas. It's all in language that should work for everybody. So it instead of saying, what was your Hanukkah like? It says, what were the formative sounds and smells and tastes of the holidays that you remember from your childhood, whether those are, you know, from Santeria or Vodun or whatever it is. And so I thought, okay, this is a much broader book than I thought it was going to be. And then they said, yeah, we don't want it to be, you know, white heteronormative couples. We want it to be families that include a single parent with a child adopted from another culture that wants to help that child feel connected with their birth culture while also raising them with the parents' culture. That too is an interfaith family. So I really had to stretch myself beyond this little, you know, a 22-year-old Jewish woman marries a 22-year-old Christian man, to make the book as expansive as possible. And I don't think any other press would have pushed me to do it that, you know, pushed me that hard to make it that open. So I'm proud of the result.
Shout out to Skinner House. You know,
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here thinking of another use for it. As a lifelong UUU and a minister facing retirement, I am trying to figure out what will be my spiritual nurturance moving forward. And so I can think, I mean, it does seem like it could be usable in a number of different situations to really help people identify what we most value and need. And so yes, I have it upstairs. I'm gonna check it out for me when I retire, because, you know, my kid doesn't want to go to church. My partner doesn't want to go to church at all. I know that, but what do I want? You know, so I'm very excited, and I am excited that Skinner House pushed you that way, and that you have that expansive horizon, that you can get that and not be like, no, I have to talk here. You know, that I think that is something that multiplicity gives as a gift, is that when you hold two, and, you know, when you hold more than one, it gives the option of getting much bigger. And I, you know, it makes me think of all of the off the gender binary stuff that's so liberating for everybody to stop thinking about it's either this or that and choose one, and it has to be, and all of that. So thank you.
Well, I would love to hear how it works for you. Please send me feedback. Yeah, it's funny because I try to be very careful not to appropriate metaphors from other forms of activism. But the funny thing is, LGBTQ plus people keep coming to me and saying, wow, this is familiar, because it is about non-binariness. And there's even a level where people often feel, okay, I'm going to use the metaphor here, closeted about having a more complex background and feel like they have to present themselves a certain way to the world. And then they kind of step out of that and say, you know what, I'm, you know, doing this. I'm reclaiming my, you know, Shinto and Confucianism, even though I'm also a Christian. And in the same way, I try not to appropriate the language. There's a very rich literature and language around interracial families, mixed race kids. And there is a piece written by Maria Root about being mixed race that I did correspond with her and asked for permission to use it. I wrote it for interfaith kids. And she said, oh, wow, this really works. I mean, she related to it and said, yes, you have my blessing to use it. It's a Bill of Rights for interfaith kids that I adapted from her Bill of Rights for mixed race kids. But I usually let other people bring up those metaphors who are in both of those worlds. And of course, there's a lot of people who are in all these worlds together, because LGBTQ plus people are more likely to be in interfaith families for statistical reasons. Also, I think for reasons of just being open-minded. And I think that similarly, there's a lot of interracial families in our interfaith families community in DC. Because if you're coming from two cultures, you're more likely to be coming from two religions. So there is a lot of overlap.
What a rich we could do this for 3 hours, but we're getting to the top of the hour. Is there anything that you haven't said, that we haven't asked, that you want to share his final thoughts. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your generosity of spirit in writing both of these books. I am a huge fan, so thank you. And is there anything you want to add or any final thoughts?
I just want to again thank the entire UU universe, because neither of my books probably would have seen the light of day if it weren't for the bravery of these presses to publish things that are challenging for more traditional religious institutions and are not seem like not interesting to sort of the bigger press that doesn't really mess with religion a lot of the time. So really, only Beacon Press and Skinner House would have published these books. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Any panelists want to chime in? Otherwise, we will see you next week with another great show. Happy New Year. And let's all say a prayer for the world. We're going to need it in all the faiths. So thank you all. See you next week. And you could stay on, Susan, if you want. Are we still on?